go. Well, what is up, Story Geeks? It's Jay.
And Justin.
Justin
Hello.
Weaver is joining me today, which is actually really exciting because Daryl Smith is on vacation. Daryl's my normal co-host, if you know Daryl. He's on vacation. Freddie is on vacation. Freddie's our normal producer. So I'm trying to run the show, and fortunately, Justin agreed to join in on this one. So very pleased to have Justin here. And also he will be joining me for the podcasts as well. So that'd be really, really fun. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm so excited.
Let the people know who you are too.
Well, hey, I'm Justin Weaver. I have been on the Story Geeks podcast a couple of times now. Blah, 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 blah. And I love stories. You guys, when I first heard about this podcast, I told Daryl, I want to be a part of this however I can. So I love that I have been invited back. I feel like a part of the group.
We love having you on. In fact, I tried tonight because I've heard from several people that they would love to have you and Michael Young on the podcast at the same time.
You were saying that would be the most positive podcast ever recorded.
The most positive podcast of all time. But alas, Michael could not join us. He had previous commitments. So tonight we're actually going to be joined by Tony Kim, who actually is the CEO and founder of Hero Within Clothing. I'm actually wearing one of those shirts if you can't see it very well, but this is actually the Wonder Woman logo in a bunch of different little ways. So he'll be joining us for the podcast tonight. On the podcast tonight, we're going to be talking about Ant-Man, the movie Ant-Man. So that'll be really, really fascinating. Hopefully you'll join us for that and get involved in that. And, it should be really fun. We're diving deep into Ant-Man, which is sort of a weird film to dive deep into because, as you said, it's kind of just a good time.
Yeah, it's a really enjoyable movie, but I didn't originally watch it thinking like, man, I need to go out with my friends and just sit and hash through all the content here.
Yes.
But just even from the questions that you sent me, there's some good things to discuss, and I'm genuinely excited about that.
It's gonna be very, very intense. I have on just one question alone, I have about a page, almost 2 pages worth of notes. So it's completely ridiculous. But we're gonna have fun doing that. Please go ahead and announce yourself in the chat. I see that Monty has joined us. I see some other people are there as well, but I don't know who you are yet because you haven't announced yourself. You also may notice that the studio looks a little different, and that's because we just turned it around. We're sitting on the other side, which is kind of fun. But hopefully the sound is good. You guys can hear well. If you guys need me to turn up the mics, let me know in the chat. But
with turning the studio around, does that make this a behind the scenes video?
It's behind the scenes on the Story Geeks Live. What are we talking about today? Today on this podcast or in this live show, we're going to be talking about this week's podcast. So this week we released our Make It Better on Jurassic World. Anthony Holder joined us for Make It Better on Jurassic World, which is a really fun podcast. And Justin and I were just talking. Tell me, like, again, based on the conversation we just had, what are some of your thoughts about Jurassic World, just off the top?
Jurassic World was a movie that I was highly anticipating coming out. Jurassic Park, which we get to record a podcast about next week, was the first PG-13 movie I was allowed to see and became my favorite movie for years and years. It's still in my top 10, but I love Jurassic Park. And so Jurassic World was one that I was excited about. It brought back so much of my love for that original movie. Just the use of John Williams music. Whenever you can use a John Williams theme, do it. And so the movie opened, one of the opening scenes was the two brothers arriving at Jurassic World, and we're being introduced to Jurassic World through the eyes of these kids to the classic Jurassic Park music. Yeah. And I was telling you, it literally brought tears to my eyes in the movie theater. That music is deep in my heart. And so that was incredible. And then with just jumping right over the entire movie to the finale, when there are raptors working with Owen to take down the Indominus Rex, and then the original T-Rex gets involved, I was just ear to ear smiling. It was just exactly what I wanted to be watching. So it was just a blast. I was so happy that it was such a success in the box office. It made, well, I mean, I think Chris Pratt was Star-Lord in Guardians first, but I mean, that cemented him as an A-list star.
Pretty much.
And so I'm so happy with that movie. And I listened to the podcast, and I think that you were one of the people, I think all three of you were kind of on the same page, where it's like super fun movie, but it has some issues with the story. It has some issues with some of the characters. And I think I was right there with you guys that I had so much fun. It pretty much was the movie that I wanted it to be, and it could have been more.
Yeah.
There's always more potential. And so
absolutely,
I'm excited to hear what your viewers thought about that podcast, and I will definitely be chiming in a couple times on some of the things that I thought about it.
Yeah. So, and we're just going to kind of walk through kind of what some of your thoughts were. So some people left some comments on Facebook. Leave your comments here in the chat so that I can read them. If I seem a little distracted, it's just because I'm trying to read the comments and do the show at the same time. But which is always, Daryl does it really well. I do it horribly. I'm like, what does this comment say? So like Monty's saying, I think Jurassic World is a cool dinosaur movie, but it didn't feel like a Jurassic Park movie to me. And I kind of feel the same way. I kind of feel that Jurassic World, it's a dinosaur, it's a monster movie.
Yeah.
But it's not a well-told story. It's a fun movie. I like it. It's just not the best story in the world. So
yeah,
I don't know.
There were some elements, especially at the beginning, that felt very Steven Spielberg, when they were feeding the T-Rex, that we weren't really able to see the T-Rex because the people were covering it. When we were originally being introduced to the Indominus Rex through the eyes of the park owner, it was just so taken aback by how scary it was, how huge it was. We're not seeing it, but we're seeing it through his face. Yeah. All of that was so effective to me, and it was setting up a lot of tension. But yeah, then it just kind of becomes an action movie,
right?
And it, an incredibly cool visual is Owen riding his motorcycle alongside the raptors.
Yeah.
But if you stop and think about that at all, it's just so absurd, and it takes you out of the story.
Very absurd. Yeah, it's very absurd. I think there's a lot you could complain about, but what we're going to do too is just try and do our best to make the story better. So throw out some comments in here. There's several ways to make stories better, right? You have some major story elements that you can play with. You can play with characters. You can play with plot. You can play with premise or theme.
Mm-hmm.
You can play with even minor things, or I shouldn't say minor things, but things that you wouldn't even associate with story, but are so impactful to our experience. Like you talked about music, and the John Williams score is so amazing that it does a lot for that movie. So just throw out some of the things. Like, let's just take the characters. What are some of the things that you guys would have said would make the characters better? On the podcast, both Daryl and Anthony, and I totally agree with this, talked about the concerns they had about the relationship. It doesn't seem like a very strong relationship between Owen and Claire. It seems like a lot of it's forced. It seems like a lot of it's very cliche. It's full of a lot of tropes. But how could we have improved that relationship? What are some of the things that we could have done to improve that particular relationship?
I loved, what was the guest name again?
Anthony Holder. Yeah.
I loved what Anthony and Daryl were saying. I think it was Daryl that went down the route of, what if they had more of a past than just the one date that they apparently went on? But what if she had been a raptor trainer with him? What if they had shared that, but then she sold out to get more money, get more prestige, whatever it might be. And so she's kind of lost her way, but those values are still buried deep in there, and they kind of get brought back through the movie. And that gives them a reason to be connected throughout the film, other than just, oh, they're two attractive, charismatic people that, should now fall in love because they're the two people we're focusing on in this movie.
Totally. I think that's a really good point. Like, one of the things that this film does that I think could have been improved is that it's pretty far-reaching in scope. Like, sure, there's the family dynamic, but then there's the military dynamic. There's the business dynamic, the business of the park operations, all those dynamics. And when you start to introduce so many different dynamics into a story, it's tough to give them all adequate screen time. So one of the things that I think that is happening a lot so let's just take the relationship between Claire and Owen, like you just talked about, is that they give us some things that are meant to manipulate us emotionally into believing more than we're ever shown in the actual story. So what I mean by that is, we're basically told, you've all kind of had well, not everybody, but a lot of people have had an experience where you had a bad date.
Right.
And the two people realized on that bad date that they were not meant for one another, right?
Right.
And so they kind of just throw that out there for us to be able to say, oh yeah, I can recognize this. I can associate this. I can put my own feelings on top of that without them giving us a very intentional backstory. So they do this in several ways too, because they also did this in the relationship between the parents and the kids.
Yeah.
They go, how can we set these kids up to already be under emotional strain before they even get to the park?
Right.
Well, how can we do that? We can have the parents getting divorced.
Right.
And we've all been around, even if your parents are still married, you've probably been around other people whose parents were divorced.
Yeah.
You know that that's an emotional strain. So going into the film, you put that on top of it without ever even having to see any of the consequences of those things.
And there's someone could make the argument that there's a little bit of a payoff just to that idea, in that the parents show up at the end together.
Yeah.
And the father is more affectionate toward his kids. So you kind of have this reminder of what really matters when you come to a life and death situation. But the parents have no story arc, because there's not there's like maybe a beginning and maybe an end, but there's not a middle, because they're not a part of the story. So just even with things like that, it felt like shotgun blasts of story elements.
Yes.
And some of them land, and some of them are like you're saying, like, oh yeah, I can relate to a bad date. Oh yeah, my buddy, it was really hard when his parents separated.
Yeah.
But they don't earn some of that in the storytelling. They just say, here's this, we're moving on.
Right. Which is, I think, is hard. I think what's hard to take about that, again, fun movie, and those little callbacks to things that we might have experienced do tie us into the movie. The problem is they don't tie us very deeply into the movie.
Yes.
So when you have a film that like Jurassic Park, wherein many of the characters are going through significant character arcs.
Yeah.
The Sam Neill character doesn't like kids.
Right.
And basically comes out of the film really loving kids and being influenced by these specific kids.
Ends the movie with them asleep in his arms.
Exactly. So I think there's things that we're not, that's not a manipulation. That's us watching him go through a journey.
Yeah.
And even the I can't remember his name, the park owner,
Hammond.
Yeah, Hammond. Even seeing Hammond go through his arc of saying, I'm so excited to do this thing, and then having the Ian Malcolm character be like, you shouldn't be doing this thing.
Yeah.
And then have to see him wrestle with the fact of, when it all goes downhill, what do I do now? How do I learn a lesson from this? What could I have learned from this?
Yeah.
Pretty intense.
Yeah.
Very broad character arcs that are happening there.
Yeah.
So
and I feel like there are a lot of parallel beginnings or parallel characters, because the owner of the park in Jurassic World, whose name I can't remember, who flies the helicopter, that's pretty fun. I liked him from the get-go, because he was not answering Claire's questions the way that she wanted him to. With
Yeah.
how's my park doing? Well, this percentage is up, and guest satisfaction is this. Like, no. Are my guests having fun? How are the animals? How are the dinosaurs? You can look them in the eye and just see if they're okay. And so I love that this guy had kind of a holistic take on this experience. He wasn't just in it for the money.
Absolutely.
He was wildly rich. He didn't need it. And he was in it to like genuinely make people happy, and in the midst of it, not exploit the dinosaurs to the extent that he could, making them comfortable, making them happy, and all of that.
Yeah.
But then he didn't even that didn't go anywhere. Like, one of the things that they were setting up that could have been a potentially strong storyline of him contradicting Claire.
Yep.
In the control room, when everything's hitting the fan,
yeah,
he's saying, no, let's hold off on taking the actions that we need.
Right.
And then he dies. And so one of the more interesting characters to me in the story didn't have a story arc, because he's just taken out right when the pterodactyls are released.
That's a fantastic point.
So that would have been one of my 3 make it better.
I like that a lot. So here's some of the comments we have. Daryl, who is the normal co-host of the show, is in the chat. So Daryl, you're kind of pseudo on vacation. But he says, in a crazy twist, Claire could have been a grown-up version of Lex, Hammond's granddaughter. That would have given her more importance right off the bat. So that's actually a really good point, is that prior films actually have the ability to deepen a character's arc.
Yeah.
Based on what we know from them in the past.
Yeah.
So we have the information on the character because it came to us in a previous film. That's kind of a cool thing too. Monty says Jurassic World is a monster movie that could have casted The Rock and would have had the same impact. That is totally true and hilarious. And they probably should have cast The Rock. And when he thinks of the past Rock films, post Gridiron Gang, they're just action. And he says, I don't feel like any of the Jurassic World characters missing a dinosaur expert like Dr. Grant or Ian Malcolm.
Yeah.
The only dinosaur expert that they really have is the now very turned bad guy who creates the Indominus Rex in the first place.
Right.
He's kind of the only expert that we see.
Right.
Kind of weird.
And not even an expert of dinosaurs kind of throughout their history, but rather just a geneticist and an expert in the mad science that, made Jurassic Park and Jurassic World possible. So he still, I feel like, thinks of it as an experiment rather than them being animals.
Yeah.
And the theme of them being animals and that being focused on so much is really interesting to me. And we were just saying that you haven't or something like that. Oh no.
Yeah.
But
well, this has like a 70, and right. I don't think it deserves it.
I think so. And that's where it goes back and forth between like, what's the purpose of a movie? Because if we're rating the story, absolutely not. If we're rating it as just a popcorn experience,
yeah,
totally. It's a super fun movie, but
agree.
As we're saying, there's a lot we can fix. But one thing that the second movie did really well was it made me care about the dinosaurs, which was super weird for me because when they are getting to the island to try to save them, you see some dinosaurs perish. And I cared about it, which I did not expect because I've always, they're a force of nature. They're an animal. I would never.
A vicious animal.
Right. Yeah. And so they are to be in awe of, but to be kept away, right. And so I've never connected with the dinosaurs as a character or as an animal until Fallen Kingdom, where I felt like they did that pretty effectively at some point.
Josh made a similar comment, not in the chat right now, but Josh has seen it and he kind of said the same thing to me earlier. A couple of comments that Josh has made as well is that he says, I'm kind of like Sam Neill in that way, talking about the kids. So maybe Josh, you need to be hunted by dinosaurs and that will turn you around. Maybe you'll love kids.
Quick fix.
Quick fix. then there's also he also mentions later, he says, totally agree with Monty. Jurassic Park is really about playing God and showcasing dinos as animals. Jurassic World exploits animals like SeaWorld. And that is interesting. So let's transition into theme a little bit, because in Jurassic Park, the theme really was about how far should we take technology, and if we take it that far, what are the potential consequences? So in other words, it was kind of like a warning, if you will, just sort of like the way that we've seen warnings before in let's say Terminator, right? Like what happens if Skynet becomes self-aware? That was kind of what we saw in the genetic engineering space, but given Jurassic Park. So what do you think the theme or the premise behind Jurassic World is?
I think that part of it has to be kind of two things, like big business and arms dealing. Because, and as silly as the arms dealing theme is, it's in there. Like
in there.
what can we use to protect ourselves and defeat our enemy? But then how could that turn against us? You know, and that's an interesting conversation, but I feel like this movie doesn't deserve that interesting of a conversation. But and then just big business, rather like PR. Because if we can stop the Indominus Rex before it gets to the people, and no one knows this happened, we're still okay. Because, you know, some people died, there were some casualties, the paddock was destroyed, however millions of dollars they invested into making the Indominus Rex. There's business hits, but their PR is still positive because they weren't the people that had a security breach, and they weren't the people that had to evacuate their park of 20 some odd thousand guests. And so that, I feel like, is good business at what cost, almost. That's, I think, the most interesting theme that I can find in that movie.
I think Josh pointed out this is kind of the theme about like what should your theme parks be like? I think that's an interesting theme. Now, I do think, based on the conversation that we're having, there is a spin-off film out there that is basically, have you ever seen Team America?
America.
So there's basically a spin-off film wherein we're dropping dinosaurs in America's enemies.
Dinosaurs.
I can just see that happening right now. There's probably that's out there somewhere. Also, there's a very bizarre discussion about Chris Pratt's abdominals going on in the chat. So I mean, hey, he does have abdominals. He works out a lot. Seen in his Instagram. I do follow him on Instagram. He's very much working out all the time, which I guess you got to do these days if you're a superhero.
And a couple Easters ago, he like built and carried a cross up a hill and put it in the ground.
Did he really?
It was a pretty moving little Instagram story.
Really?
Yeah, somewhere on his Instagram, it was an Easter. He and his buddy did that on like a hill outside his house or something.
Okay.
Super interesting.
Hey.
But to do that, you have to have crazy Chris Pratt abs.
That's right. It was like a CrossFit exercise.
A literal CrossFit.
Well done, Justin Weaver. That was a Daryl Smith joke, so it's kind of like having him in studio.
Oh, I'm glad. Hey, Daryl.
He's over there. He's supposed to be on vacation, but he's just hanging out. Okay, so we talked about characters. We've talked about kind of the premise of the. Daryl says that his wife made that same joke just as
nice
as you did. So, the premise of the film, talked about the characters of the film. Let's talk about the plot of the film a little bit. We've got several factors going on in this film. Obviously, we have the plot where the Claire is trying to squeeze as much profit out of this park as she possibly can. I believe it's Verizon Wireless is going to sponsor the dinosaur or something. I can just see like a sticker on the back of the dinosaur, like sponsored by Verizon Wireless. So there's that aspect of it, and that kind of what Josh was referring to into the SeaWorld aspect. Have you seen Blackfish, by the way?
I haven't, but I'm familiar with it.
Oh my gosh, it's terrifying. We have not, my wife and I have not been back to SeaWorld, and we basically actively boycott it at this point.
Wow.
That's how crazy that movie is. Now, granted, it's fairly one-sided, but be hard to find contrasting arguments that were good.
The explanation for all of it that makes you go, oh,
Exactly.
okay, then that's all fine.
Exactly. So go watch Blackfish. It's not as fun as Jurassic World, just FYI.
But maybe more worth our conversation.
Maybe. There are no Chris Pratt abs, so heads up on that. But there's that kind of theme. We have what is the obligation of businesses, if you will. We have themes around the military and this or paramilitary, because I don't think those guys are actually military. I think they're more paramilitary, and the business of military, and him trying to basically bring dinosaurs into weaponize raptors, and bring them into war. We have some themes around family and the deconstruction and reconstruction of family and what families mean. We have a story about romance. It'd be hard pressed to say that there's a story there. But if you wanted to find one, maybe there is one.
And so I was watching one of the special features, and their first kiss when the pterodactyls are attacking was something the director suggested that day. So it wasn't even something that was written into the script. So there were, obviously, I mean, at least for where the movie ended, there had to have been some romantic elements written in.
Right.
But at the very least, some of the big romantic beats of the movie were day of not improv, but like rewrites as we're shooting.
That's always very scary to me. Oh my gosh. But hey, what are you gonna do? So what, in your mind, what should the movie have been about? What should it have concentrated on in order to make it better? You have all these converging stories, but what should have been like the central theme of that film?
So the idea of what if Jurassic Park got up and running? It got past that, first day and was a wild success and tons of people loved it, and then it breaks. That's a really cool story to me. So the premise and the setting of Jurassic World is compelling to me.
Yeah.
And then since we're dealing with 20,000 some odd people that are in danger, bringing it down to the two kids and the one dinosaur specialist, making it personal, they had some elements that set up for an incredibly good story.
Yeah.
That I, again, still really enjoy Jurassic World, but I feel like they just needed to keep doing what they were doing, but justify it more. Like we've been talking about.
Yeah.
They did they had a bad date. Oh, their parents are in trouble. But we didn't connect. We don't care about almost any of the connections of those four characters.
Right.
Because the aunt, Claire, has been pretty actively avoiding the kids. And we just watched a spoof, that kind of made the point that it seems like she's saving them just to not get in trouble with her sister, not because of a deep love for these kids or anything like that, or true concern for their well-being. And she teams up with Owen, not because she cares about him, but because he's a means to an end.
Right.
And, again, these are all fine places to start, but they didn't really take us anywhere from there.
Exactly.
I loved your idea of a Cloverfield kind of, whether it was found footage or just an even more intimate movie. So we're not flashing back to the control room, which is hard for us to identify with because we've never run a theme park, right. Especially one that the assets are man-eating monsters. But we're just a family on vacation, and then things completely out of our control go haywire. That felt scary to me. That the tension, all the elements that are unknown, because we don't have access to the trackers so that we can know exactly where the dinosaurs are. The dinosaurs are just all of a sudden there.
Right.
I thought that was a super compelling idea.
Thanks. It was. I was thinking of it in the context of this, right? Like, what is the most compelling thing that could occur? So Josh brings up Blackfish, right? To me, Blackfish is such an interesting thematic element that could be applied to Jurassic World in a very serious way.
Yeah.
Because what we could say is when we cage animals that basically have already been broken in some way, shape, or form. So we're not dealing with super healthy animals here. And they're not even animals that we should put in these places.
Right.
What happens when we do that? And then we put people we love in those places, and the animals reject their environment, right? That's what happens in Blackfish. I mean, that's the basic story of Blackfish, is that these hurt animals start to hurt other people because these animals have PTSD effectively. And certain animals do, at least in that story. I think that presents us with a couple of really compelling stories, because first of all, you could have put the parents with the kids in the park. Now these parents who are considering getting a divorce, but are kind of like doing this last minute trip to kind of help their kids through this time. Now you're dealing with these the situation where the family can really come back together around this extreme kind of situation where these dinosaurs are coming after the family. The brothers who have this kind of contentious relationship, the older brother is kind of like, I don't care about stuff, I'm just trying to flirt with girls, can now come together because he has to take care of his little brother, make sure his little brother's okay. You can take some of the people, not the people who are running the park, like, because you said, I don't know, there's very few people in this world that know what is the Bob Iger. There's very few people in this world that know what Bob Iger's day-to-day life is like, right? But a lot of us know what it's like to work as a supervisor at Disneyland. A lot of us know what it would be like to be a line worker at Disneyland. A lot of us would know what it would be like, even producer Freddie, who's not here today, but producer Freddie works at Disney doing that stuff. You work at Disney. It would be so compelling to see you. Let's just say that you and your wife are both in the park working at opposite ends of the park. You're both in Jurassic World working at opposite ends of the park. And you have to figure out how to get together in the event that all of these dinosaurs are coming around and eating people.
Right.
This is terrifying, and we can relate to you because we know what it's like to be in those situations.
And there's a character in one scene of Jurassic World that I think the entire audience relates to, because he's the guy that has to deliver to a long line of people waiting to get in those gyrospheres. Hey, we're closed. I need you to go away. And everyone's frustrated at him. And he's just like, oh, come on, guys. I just work here.
Oh, that's good.
And we all relate to that, because it's like, whatever your job is, you know, you've been sold out of the product that everyone wants. You've had the machine breakdown that makes the food that someone's ordering, you know, whatever the thing is. And so to have him be a partner in this experience with them, we can relate to that. He can be the comic relief, he can be whatever, but at least he knows enough about the park to know the shortcuts and stuff like that.
Totally. So a couple more comments here. We have Josh Taylor from Network 1901 says, Jurassic World, we just made this up and are banking you think Jeff Goldblum is in this more. which is probably true, because the reality is that Josh and I did a series on Network 1901 about Jeff Goldblum, and it's a subtle plug, Josh. I know it's a subtle plug, but you should go listen to that series because it's really fun, because Jeff Goldblum movies are super, super fun. But that would be hilarious, and I do think that's kind of what they were hoping. Jim Baldwin says, I think Jurassic World is the Phantom Menace of the Jurassic Park series. Look at all of this really cool stuff we can do. And oh yeah, I guess we should put some sort of story in there at some point, which is hilarious. And also Cocktail Cinema, which is my friend Isaac Johnson, says the plot is essentially a bunch of story threads or ideas that never pay off. So all of those things being very, very true. So here's what I wanted you guys to do in the comments, because we're going to wrap up in about 10 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes. I would love to hear, what story change would you make? Do you agree with one of the story changes you heard us talk about in the podcast? Do you have a completely different story change that you would like to propose to us in the chat? Go ahead and do that. If you're not watching live, do that as well. We'd love to hear how you would make Jurassic Park better. And then, Justin, I'm going to turn to you. So you'd be thinking about that too. What's the one thing you would do to make this movie better if you could make one big change? And we won't put any restrictions on that. They don't need to be story changes necessarily. If you want to change casting, if you want to change director, if you want to change whatever, just go for it. So let's do that. So you guys start to get that ready in your minds, put them into the chat. And then Justin, I'll have to turn to you and see what you think. I can go first though. While you guys are thinking about that, let me go ahead and go first. Anthony Holder said on the podcast, if you guys are listening, you heard this, but this is really worth thinking about for a minute. And I don't know if it's I don't have this information. I don't know where Anthony got this information, but this is the story that he heard, is that the writer of Jurassic World had never seen Jurassic Park.
No.
That's the rumor. I don't know if that's true or not. That's according to Anthony Holder. If that's true, I would say without a doubt, that's the change that I would make. You cannot write this film unless you have seen Jurassic Park. That should be a prerequisite to everything that's done here. So that's my one change. What is your one change?
And just going off of that for 1 second, I'm curious how that person, if that's true, I've never heard that, but let's just say it's true. How that person gets that gig, like what the pitch is in the office where it's like, I want to write this movie, but I've never seen any of them. When can I start? I just can't believe that. Exactly. The one thing I change, I'm trying to remember if someone made a point of this in the podcast or if I just kind of went off on a tangent with you guys, that there would be protesters. That would try to sabotage the park.
Yes.
And that felt like such a more interesting, compelling, challenging situation to start with, instead of the incompetence of letting people into the Indominus Rex cage.
That's right.
Before we had because they realized, oh, it's in there with the human beings that walked in. And that it continues to feel like a great moment for suspense, but just poor. If you're thinking about these people are professionals in their field, it's such a novice mistake. And so I would have loved to see something like the protesters taking it a step too far and messing with the mechanics and unleashing hell, which is doing what they wanted in one sense, but then making bigger problems in another. I think that the movie 28 Days Later started that way, where there's experimentation going on monkeys, and some protesters go in to free the monkeys, and the doctor's like, no, you don't understand, you can't do this. They get bit by it, and it infects the world.
Zombies.
And it's super interesting because the protesters aren't necessarily wrong, but they went about it the wrong way. And so, I think that would have been, especially, I think that's what it was connected to, especially with the blackfish background. What if some people were convinced that this was wrong? Even if you created these dinosaurs, this is wrong to do. I think some people could have gotten behind that and believed the mistake that would come of it, with the opening of the gates to free the animals, but then they pay the price.
I really like that. I like that a lot. I like that whole line of thinking. So I got a couple of ideas here on how to make it better. Monty says, I would have made the main character a woman. Isn't the main character a woman already? Monty, I don't understand that.
I think so.
I don't know what Monty's talking about. But you mean, I guess maybe what he's suggesting is that she's just played as maybe a character that doesn't even need a gender. Maybe Monty.
And she's not nearly
Pratt's
as interesting.
Pratt's character.
Okay.
Should have been.
But I mean, she's not as interesting as Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt is just such a dynamic performer, and he's so charismatic. It's hard to imagine someone being a star above him unless Chris Pratt's just the comic relief way off to the side.
That's true. Okay, a couple more things. We have one question too that we can answer before we sign off. And I do need to read a couple comments from Facebook, so I will do that as well. This is from M5. Do you think there are going to explore the human cloning concept in Jurassic World 3 I haven't seen Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom yet, but you have.
Yes.
Is that something you think that they're going to pursue?
So I mean, should I talk about Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom?
This will be spoilers. This will be spoilers. I don't care if I'm spoiled because
Okay.
I'm not too worried about this film.
Okay.
So if you don't want to be spoiled about Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, then thanks for watching this week. We'll see you on the next program.
Awesome. Bye. But if you're still here, there is a human clone in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom that was successfully created. And so they take that to the next level in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. And I think it's only a matter of time. And there's always been production art of what would it look like for a human raptor combo, and what kind of a soldier would that be? And I think that's the logical end for the storyline of weaponizing raptors.
Yeah.
If we can make something that can follow orders like a human, that has the speed and ferocity of a raptor, then we have designed the perfect soldier.
Yeah.
And so if they want that to be the story, that's where it has to go. I think that would be a satisfying conclusion to some of those stories. And they've laid all the pieces, including a human clone that is in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom.
Well, that is fascinating. That's a really good question, M5. So glad that you actually asked it, because a lot of times on this show we dig really deep, and it just so happens that we're more digging into Jurassic World than we are Fallen Kingdom. We will eventually dig into Fallen Kingdom as well, because it's what we do. But that's a really fascinating question. And there's a lot of ways that we can go with that. But I won't right now, but that's a lot of ways that we can go with that. And then Daryl says that Fallen Kingdom is so much farther off the rails than the first one. So now before we close out, I do want to read some of the comments we got from Facebook. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll wrap up the show. So here's just some of the things that people would change that they threw out there on Facebook. Caitlin Gibson says, let Chris Pratt make some friggin' jokes. They had one of the funniest leading men in our generation, and they wasted him. And actually, I want to comment on that, because Chris Pratt really changed from his roles in other films to this film. Like, this was his leading man film, the traditional leading man. In other words, he has some like wry humor, but there's none of that over the top Chris Pratt humor that you might see in Guardians of the Galaxy, or that you most definitely would have seen in Parks and Rec with him being Andy. We left that Chris Pratt behind. Yeah. He is not showing up here at all. So I totally agree that you're kind of wasting Chris Pratt. You're actually turning Chris Pratt's biggest strength, which is not his abs and which is not his muscles, but which is his humor, and you're just pushing that away just to rely on his abs. So it's very, very strange to me. Jim Baldwin actually said it's been so long since he saw it, he can't remember much about it. And maybe that's why we need to make it better. And he's right about that. Chris Wetzel actually commented that he would like less dinosaurs, fewer dinosaurs, and stronger characters in story, which is kind of what we've been breaking down and trying to figure out. And then Mary Baldwin actually has left several ideas here. Vincent D'Onofrio and Bryce Dallas Howard are totally irrational at times. Who decided these two needed to be lead decision makers? Yeah, that's a really good question, right? Like, you can kind of see how Claire might get her job because she's like really good at business.
Yeah.
But you're like, how in the world did Vincent D'Onofrio's character get his job? Because dude is the biggest tool that's out there. And he's like not even smart. Very, very strange.
And it doesn't even feel like he's a resident of the island, because I feel like when he shows up on this scene at the beginning of the movie, he's like arriving. And so, I don't understand exactly his connection. It's just an odd element.
Yep.
And I love the actor. I mean, he does a good job of performing that role. In going off topic, he does a great job in Daredevil as the Kingpin. But it's an odd character.
It's odd. It's very odd. So with that, we're going to start to close out the show. Cocktail Cinnamon did say that he would take the convenience out of the plot. Case in point, where the characters need to drive a Jeep, they shoehorn in a line about, remember that time we drove a Jeep. It's very true. In fact, what I would leave you guys with, I'm not going to put a link in the stream right now, but what I would leave you with is the pitch video that we watched right before this. What's the
Yeah.
name of that video?
I believe it's called Pitch Meeting Jurassic World.
Pitch Meeting Jurassic World. It is hilarious, and you guys should go watch it. It's on YouTube. Pitch Meeting Jurassic World. You will not regret it.
And those guys have a lot of video. I keep saying those guys. It's one guy. That guy and his, writers. I'm sure
crew.
It's not just him.
Yeah.
He has a series of these videos, and I binged like 5 or 6 of them in a sitting, and they're so funny. So
they're very, very smart. He's sort of like digging deeper, like we dig deeper into films all the time, especially on our podcast. He's doing that, but he's doing it in a very wry sense of humor type of a way. So definitely worth your watch. Go check that out. In the meantime, we've got some really cool things coming up. Justin and I are going to shut down this live feed in just a few minutes because we're going to go record a dig deeper into Ant-Man podcast that will be coming out in the next couple weeks. And by the way, if you don't think there are deep themes in Ant-Man, there is redemption as a theme. There's a question of what's good and what's bad. There's all kinds of themes in there that are very fascinating that we will be diving very deep into with Tony Kim from Hero Within. Also, be sure and check out modernmouseboutique.com. They're sponsors of this show. If you purchase anything from modernmouseboutique.com, be sure and use code StoryGeeks, one word, StoryGeeks, no spaces. You'll get 10% off, which is really cool. So make sure you go and do that as well. Some other things we got coming up. You can go watch this right now on our YouTube feed. You can go to our YouTube feed about Spider-Man. We broke down Spider-Man in the MCU with NerdSync, which is really cool. NerdSync has a fantastic channel. You should go check out that channel. If you like comic book stuff at all, you'll love what NerdSync is doing. Check that out. But what we got him to do was talk with us about Spider-Man and dive really deep into Spider-Man's character from the MCU. So you can watch that right now on YouTube, or if you prefer, because it's like a 2-hour session with NerdSync, instead you can go subscribe to our podcast, and that will come out this coming Tuesday. So right in time for your July 4th weekend. If you have a long drive where you got to go somewhere on July 4th, you got to get to, I got an hour drive ahead of me. So I can just pop the podcast in, listen to the podcast, and there you go. Front and back, 2 hours. So that'd be really great. Make sure you guys check that out. The links for that stuff are already in the show notes, so you can check that stuff out. Right now, you can go subscribe. I won't just hit the microphone, I promise, all that often, because I do sometimes. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you guys for joining us in the chat. Next Thursday, Justin will be back with me because Daryl is still on vacation. I may or may not have Freddie. I'm not sure yet. But we still need topics. So if you guys want to see us talk about specific things, what we'll probably be talking about is Spider-Man and the MCU again, because we'll have the podcast that we can kind of break down again. So that's probably what we'll be talking about on the live show next week, digging a little bit deeper into those themes. There's also the Miles Morales Spider-Man movie
Into
that's
the
coming
Spider-Verse.
out. Yeah, which looks amazing. So we might get into that a little bit too. So join us next week, Thursday night. Be sure and check out the podcast coming out on Tuesday. Daryl will be back in a couple of weeks. If you don't like me and you just watch this for Daryl, which is probably true, then do that. Otherwise, I know everyone loves Justin, so definitely make sure you check that out now. And then Monty threw out a comment and said that Jared Leto is in the MCU. That's something that sounds crazy, so we'll have to check that out later. We'll see you guys on the next live show or the next podcast. Thank you for watching. End.